Good morning and welcome to this first conversation of this program that has become one of the festival's signature events. So over the next 10 days, we will host 14 conversations with filmmakers and actors, creating here at Medan Theatre a true space for transmission and dialogue around cinema. So the guests you will meet throughout these 10 days have come to share with great generosity their journeys, their inspirations, and their vision of cinema. So tomorrow, we will welcome actresses Virginie Efira and Chiara Mastroianni for a panel conversation about the craft of acting. And tomorrow afternoon, you will have the rare opportunity to listen to the extraordinary actress Jodie Foster, whom the festival is honoring this evening. And to open this year's conversation program, we are delighted to welcome Brazilian filmmaker Kleber Mendonc Filho. Kleber is not only one of the most exciting voices in contemporary cinema, but he's also a friend of the festival, where he served as a jury member a few years ago, and he came back also to present his documentary Pictures of Ghosts 2 years ago. And to moderate this discussion, this conversation, another friend of the festival, Nashen Moodley, director of the Sydney Film Festival in Australia, who gives us the pleasure every year to host several of our conversations. So please give a warm welcome to Kleber Mendonc Filho and Nashen Moodley.
Thank you very much.
Welcome everyone to the Marrakech International Film Festival. It's so really nice to see all of you here. And I should say it's really a privilege to host this conversation with the great Brazilian director, Kleber Mendonc Filho, whose most recent film, The Secret Agent, won Best Actor, Best Director, and the International Critics Prizes at Cannes earlier this year. Congratulations, Kleber. And I think as importantly, the film has had 1 million admissions in Brazil. And I think that's really incredible news. So congratulations on that too. If you'll allow me a minute or two, I just want to say some nice things about you. Is that okay?
Yes, of course.
A filmmaker of great intelligence and a true cinephile, Kleber Mendonc Filho's films are layered and complex portraits of his native Brazil and his beloved hometown of Recife. His works look at the various strata of Brazilian society and engage with politics, race, class, history, family, sexuality, architecture, cinema as an art form, and cinemas as physical spaces. They're also expressive and exuberant, and I don't exaggerate when I hear that Kleber Mendonc Filho has a new film, I'm truly filled with anticipation and excitement. He's one of the truly distinctive filmmakers working today, and it is such a great pleasure for me to host this conversation with him. Kleber, as I mentioned, you're a true cinephile. I'm always in awe of how many films you see, how many films you've seen, how much you know about the cinema. Let's begin by your telling us, what were the first films you loved and your first experiences of watching films? And I have an extension to that question. I know you love other art forms. And considering your films, I feel you could have been a musician, you could have been an architect, you could have been a writer. What was it that led to the cinema being your art form of choice, your means to create?
Well, thank you very much for that question. I think from a very early age, I've always loved films. I was taken to the cinema many times as a child by my mother at the time, in the 70s as a little kid, and that's when I developed this. I've been fascinated by films. I don't think I really had a plan B in terms of thinking of a professional career. I wanted to make films from a very early age, and Recife at the time did not have a film school. I did journalism because I have always enjoyed writing, and I thought that journalism would connect me or maybe bring me closer to maybe working with culture or watching films and writing about films. And I did have the romantic notion of becoming a film critic from an early age, and I did become a film critic at some point. But I guess I grew up watching in the 70s most of the American films that came out in Brazil at the time. A few Brazilian films at the time, because censorship would put a limit to what I could see as a kid. And I think it was in the early 80s that I began to see other kinds of films. And probably the first film that showed me that there could be a different kind of way of making films was probably Fitzcarraldo by Herzog. And at the time, my mother did a PhD. She did her PhD in England, so we moved to England, and we spent 4 years living in England, and that's when I was a teenager, and I began to see many different films, which were not from the United States alone. So I think it's very much like food. You have to diversify what you eat, and I think in cinema that's how I felt as I moved into my teenage years, and I think it had to this day I think it had a strong effect on me. That's when I discovered French films and German films, Mexican films, and then I finally discovered the Brazilian films.
I want to ask a bit about this period of your being a film critic. You were saying yesterday that you'd go to Cannes, and it was so exciting for you to see all these films. Yeah. So you worked as a film critic for many years before making the first feature film. How did your work in film criticism impact your style as a director, if at all?
I think it's hard to try to understand. It must have had a very strong impact on my wanting to be a filmmaker, or wanting to develop a film. But the years I spent as a film critic, they were very important for me, because I was put in the position of watching many, many films. And the interesting thing about being a film critic, and it's actually something I miss, because in our normal lives, we see the films we want to see. We go to the cinema because we want to see that film, right? As a film critic, I would see even the films in my right mind, I would not want to see. Yeah. But I did see them because it was part of my job. And by doing that, I would make discoveries, which I wouldn't have made if I. So I got to see a great number of films. And then I had to practice the exercise of writing about them. And I did that for 13 years, so it just became a constant exercise of trying to understand what culture is telling us. And I think that's how I see criticism. I think criticism is trying to understand what culture is doing. Some kind of temperature to society and the world, and that can be applied to music and literature also. But in cinema, you might see a romantic comedy, a commercial film, and it might still be very interesting because you can get a temperature on what's happening. But then I did my short films, and it was time to prepare and write my first feature, Neighboring Sounds. And it just felt like the right time to switch. And I remember leaving criticism, quitting on a Friday, and then starting pre-production on Neighboring Sounds on Saturday morning. Wow. Which was, it was almost like quitting smoking, yeah.
Before that, you made some short films. So as we learned from Pictures of Ghosts, you made lots of short films. But closer to Neighboring Sounds, you made some short films that traveled to festivals. How did those short films help you on your path to that first feature?
When I was making my short films, there were times I felt I wouldn't really go into feature films because I was actually very happy making my short films, and they did quite well. It's very much about, it's not only about getting prizes, but about a kind of reaction, resonance that they seemed to get every time they came out. So I did a string of short films which became quite well known, and I was perfectly happy making them. But then I just naturally sat down and wrote the script for Neighboring Sounds, and then when that film came out, I realized that the short film world, as wonderful as it was, it seemed to have some limitations, not because of the format itself, but because how the market, the industry looks at them. So I remember, so you're a filmmaker? Yeah, I am. What kind of films you make? Oh, yeah, I made this short film. Oh, it's a short film. When are you going to make a, like a real film? And I thought they were real films. I still do. And I love each and every one of them, even with their, maybe they're not perfect, but I love them, and they're an important part of my life. But I did feel a huge difference in terms of, now you're a real filmmaker. You made a film which is kind of, long. I see a short film I did many years ago called Green Vinyl, which went to the Director's Fortnight in Cannes. I think it's as important as The Secret Agent for me. One is 15 minutes and the other is 2 hours and 40 minutes. But I gave them the same love.
Yeah. We're going to look at a clip in a moment, but just before we do that, I think we should acknowledge the presence of the producer of all the films that we're going to speak about today, the wonderful Emily Lesclos. Emily. Thank you for being with us. Now let's take a look at what is for me an absolutely thrilling opening of Neighboring Sounds. Let's play the clip. It's a tremendous start to the film. I remember I was at the world premiere in Rotterdam back in 2012, and I think I said, oh, hello. Someone has something to say. I almost want to get close to the screen. I think it's a tremendous opening of the film. But tell us about the construction of this opening and what's behind your decisions, the use of the black and white photographs, and these very precise snippets as we first encounter the people of this neighborhood.
Well, the photographs keep coming back in later films. Aquarius opens with black and white photographs, and also The Secret Agent. For Neighboring Sounds, I think I really like the intersection, the moment reality meets cinema. So the photographs come from the 60s in Pernambuco, which is where I come from, where there was a lot of tension with land reform, and that's precisely when the military coup took place in 1964. So that area was seen as incredibly red, as in communist, because there was this idea that land should be given out for people to work. And of course, the land belonged to traditional families who basically did nothing with the land. And so that's the historic basis of the whole film, except that the film doesn't take place in the countryside, in the outback. The film takes place in the city, in one street, which in fact most of the real estate belongs to one family. So the whole idea of the film, and this was never really used in the press release, what you have on the street is precisely what was happening back in the 60s in the land. But the film never tells you this. But we open with the pictures, and then we cut to color and movement. And slowly, you might understand that this is what the film is about. It's about the power of having space, basically. And the space is commercial, is rented or sold. And I really love the intersection between some kind of archival images which are real and beautiful, but then I will make a film which is fiction and which goes into places which I hope are far from a documentary. I don't think this film feels like a kind of kitchen sink documentary. It's more like a film, and I love the mixing of both.
The film brilliantly creates this rising tension, a sort of state of paranoia, a feeling of insecurity, even though there isn't a great deal of violence in the film, but there's always a thread of it, or people are afraid of something. The unease feels almost unwarranted until you gradually reveal the history of the place and its inhabitants. Tell us about this idea of the past having such a profound effect on contemporary times in the context of Brazilian history.
Well, I think societies which are dramatically unequal, where you have the few who have a lot and then the many who don't have much, is a place which generates tension. And usually the people at the top, it's not that they should be afraid, but they are often afraid of something. And I think this tension exists in most societies. Brazil is not the only one. I can see that in the United States, for example, in Europe, and I'm sorry. But I think in Brazil, of course, that's where I come from, and fear manifests itself in the way that people live. So I was actually living in that neighborhood when we made the film. One of the film's locations was our home. Never use your home to make a film.
I wanted to ask, why did you do that? Why was that necessary?
Because it was, when I wrote the script, I couldn't not think of our home, because our home had the perfect, I think I was inspired by the way our home was, and the way its relationship to the outside and to the neighbor's dog. So it was very much about the place where we live, we used to live. And of course it would be cheaper, we didn't have to pay for a very bad idea. It came out expensive. But I really think that, I lost my train of thought. I really think that the whole idea of tension comes from, you can see tension physically with the steel bars and the high perimeter walls and the security systems. And that, I think, is really photogenic in a strange way. And I think it's very much part of the film. And I had been looking at that in my short films also. So it was a development in feature length for neighboring sounds. And I think it generates quite a lot of tension also. I think tension has to do with the placement of the camera also in an interesting way. Sometimes you place the camera a little bit to the left, and now you have something which is, and it generates some visual tension.
Another source of tension, as the title of the film indicates, sound is really vital in creating the atmosphere of the film. Tell us how you went about creating this exquisite, frequently disturbing soundscape.
Well, the interesting thing about sound, especially in that film and in that place, as I as I have just told you, we used to live there. The physical barriers to avoid people or people coming from the outside are many, you know, the physical barriers. But sound doesn't care for these barriers. It doesn't show any respect for these barriers. So the sound just goes through. And I think it's, I mean, there are moments in the film when someone is just at home, but you can actually hear the neighbor. You can hear the neighbor's voice having an argument. And of course, there is the dog which keeps barking and drives one of the main characters insane because of all the barking. And this happened to us. It was our neighbor's dog, and it barked for many years. And these elements, they were used in the film. And when you isolate certain sounds in cinema, because mixing is all about choosing which sounds will be relevant to the film. And I think the problem with many, there are many contemporary films where you hear everything. And I think if you hear just the right sounds, it's probably stronger, rather than just being a complete storm of sound, which is often what happens in. Not only you hear the bird that flies by and you hear its wings going, which I'm not sure I hear that in real life, but it's like over sound, you know, hyper sound. But if you concentrate on those meaningful sounds, I think it tends to be stronger. Of course, I'm just telling you it's a matter of personal taste. You know. There are no rights or wrongs, I think, in what you do in filmmaking. It either works or it doesn't for a particular member of the audience. You know.
If neighboring sounds creates this mysterious tension, your next film, Aquarius, depicts a much clearer conflict between entitled, wealthy property developers and a strong-willed woman who refuses to give in to them and sell them her apartment. It's a long scene from Aquarius that I want to play, but I think it's a wonderful scene. So let's play the clip from Aquarius. As we see there, and that's a hint, the film has many characters and unusually doesn't have a conventional main character, like Neighboring Sounds, actually. I wanted to ask about the characters who live in Bacurau. How did you develop this many characters that form this community? And how difficult is it that to do as opposed to what you did in Aquarius, where Clara is so much the center of the film and the other characters and situations revolve around her?
It's a tough question to answer because I really love characters, and we developed the characters, myself and Giuliano, thinking we just fell in love with so many ideas for those characters. For example, Lunga is the son of the community, but somehow he got involved with crime and violence, and he has a great heart, and then he comes back to protect the village. Sonia Braga plays Dominguez. I'm quite sure she's an experienced nurse, but because the community doesn't have a doctor, she became the community's doctor, so that's an interesting idea. There is the music man who is almost like he comments on the action almost like a Greek chorus, but of a one-man Greek chorus. But the community was laid out to be very diverse in the best possible way. It shouldn't feel like an utopia, because a community with about 100 people, I think it's still possible to have the right combination of characters who would make all of that work. 1,000 would be pushing it a little bit, I think. But they're really interesting people, and they all have their own personalities, And it really comes from writing, and it also comes from the people we found, you know, the amazing actors and sometimes non-professional actors who brought their own personality. One of the people we see in that clip is Tanya Maria, who is now in The Secret Agent. And in The Secret Agent, she has a real role, and she became a star in Brazil. And she's very popular wherever the film screens. And she's so, I mean, she's such a great presence. And so it's really about finding amazing people and great faces. You know, I think a lot of filmmaking is finding the right faces. You know.
And do these varied characters, from the doctor or nurse, as you say, to the bandit, people of different races, ages, coming together to save themselves, speak to a greater message of what you feel people in Brazil and elsewhere need to do? This notion of solidarity in the face of brute force.
Well, essentially, Bacurau is a Western. And I think it has a classic Western trope, which is the community which is threatened by outside forces. But at some point, I really felt that the film was turning into a war film, in a way. And then myself and Juliano, we discussed some crucial historic moments which would make us think about that kind of conflict. You know, for example, the Vietnam War, for example, the Warsaw Ghetto, the uprising which took place. And these are moments when there was a confrontation, very violent confrontation, and it had to do with survival and with an idea of revolution. I don't think Bacurau is about revolution. I think it's about reaction. And I don't really see it as a revenge picture, which would be fine. I mean, I have enjoyed revenge films, many revenge films, but I think it's very much about a reaction. You know, someone who is being bullied, and then you get a reaction to the bullying, and it's a very violent reaction. And it seemed to capture, it seemed to hit a nerve in many places where it was shown. And of course, it became a very successful film in Brazil, a very popular film, in fact.
From the mayhem and violence of Bacurau, your next film could probably be called your most personal. Pictures of Ghosts, partly a documentary, or mostly a documentary, is a glorious love letter to your late historian mother, Joselise, your hometown of Recife, and the films and the cinemas that made you. Let's have a look at a clip. You mourn the loss of many cinemas in Pictures of Ghosts. And if anything, in many places in the world, things have become even worse. How do you feel about the future of cinema, or cinemas these days? Will it remain a part of popular culture, or is it headed towards something more niche?
I think we're in the middle of a crisis, and it's happening everywhere. I think cinema is still alive in terms of going to the cinema, but we are, I think, with streaming culture, and also with the pandemic, there was I think that the rules were changed, because it's always been very clear that to see a film, you would see it in the cinema. That's the rule. And you would know that in a few months, you could see it at home. Now, this is not so clear anymore. And I think this is taking many people away from the cinema-going experience. And I think the industry, I think the industry, particularly in Hollywood, the United States, they really have to draw a line if they want to keep film going still alive. But I'm not sure this is going to happen. You know, draw a line by saying, it's a rule, we will only release films on streaming after 3-4 months. I would say 4 months. But it's really not clear. So now that The Secret Agent is in cinemas in Brazil, we made it crystal clear that this film will be in cinemas only in for months, and then only later it will be streaming at some point. And if you send that message, if you make it clear, people will come, and this is what's happening in Brazil now. The film is quite successful in cinemas, and the film-going experience of seeing it in the cinema is one of the things that keeps me making films. People say never, but I do not feel, I don't feel like making a film only for streaming. I don't think I would picture it. I don't think I would concentrate on what I have to do if I knew that the end result would be screened for the first time in a streaming platform. I like the idea of my films later going to streaming. I don't have a problem with that. But I really believe that the presenting them in cinemas and them having a life. Right now, The Secret Agent is screening in New York City in cinemas. I really think that helps build the character of a film. And later, yeah, you can watch it any way you want, at home, on a telephone, on a video projector. I've read young people or all kinds of people saying that I saw, Neighboring Sounds. After 2 weeks, I finished Neighboring Sounds. Fine, but like watching the film in 17 parts. But at some point, I know that film had its best life in cinemas. At the Sydney Film Festival, in the State Theatre, in so many cinemas in Brazil and the US and France and in the UK. That makes me happy.
Watching in the last weeks the documentary Pictures of Ghosts and thinking about the Secret Agent, the connections between the two are very, very clear. Pictures of Ghosts is in part a beautiful tribute to your mother and her work and research, while The Secret Agent involves a search in the archives for her mother. There's more than a passing resemblance between the projectionist you have footage of in Pictures of Ghosts, someone you obviously admired a lot, yeah, and the heroic fictional version in The Secret Agent. They share a name and a resemblance. Tell us about how the documentary fed into the feature and how the idea for the feature aided in the construction of the documentary, if at all.
Oh, thank you for that question, because I think it was one of the most unexpected and wonderful things that happened. I spent about 7 years working on Pictures of Ghosts, looking for archive photographs, bits of film, audio, visiting the public archive and looking at newspapers from all across the 20th century about the city, about the cinemas, and that really gave me an emotional basis for me to write The Secret Agent. Now, The Secret Agent is a completely different film from Pictures of Ghosts, but at the same time, they are like brothers. They're very close in terms of a heart, but mostly about going back to the past and building a historic atmosphere, which I think is one thing that I really wanted to do in The Secret Agent. And building the past, it's not only about what you remember, because as I said, I was a kid in the 70s, but it's also about reconnecting with history itself, stories that you read in the newspapers from the 70s, stories that I was told. And also I think it happens to all of us. We remember what we remember, but sometimes we borrow memories. Sometimes you might take a memory from an older friend or from your parents, and then it becomes your memory. And I think that's an interesting idea, when you're developing a film about memory and also about forgetting. I think The Secret Agent is very much about amnesia also. Self-inflicted amnesia.
That's a good segue to have a look at a clip from The Secret Agent. We're going to look at the opening scene of the film. The little spot of blood is a good touch, I think. It's terrifying. The Secret Agent is, in a way, a culmination of themes and ideas that have run through all of your prior works. But it's set in an earlier time, in the 70s, during the time of dictatorship. What is it that drew you to this era? And you would have been very young at the time. What are your memories of that period, if any, at all?
I remember in school as a little kid, every Friday they made us march like little soldiers. One of the most ridiculous things I can remember about the dictatorship. But I think it's interesting because I never really wanted to do a film about the dictatorship. I wanted to make a film set in the 70s. And by setting it in the 70s, it would be unavoidable to have the military regime being part of what the whole film, the whole story would be. So I was more interested in making a film about the logic of that time, which came from the military dictatorship. I think Brazilian, Chilean, Argentinian cinema, they have almost like a subgenre of cinema, which is the military dictatorship films. And many great films have been made. Walter Salles' film from last year, I'm Still Here, is a wonderful film. It's a beautiful film. And Brazilian cinema has, you know, a wonderful list of strong films. Argentina has The Official Story, which I think is a wonderful film, 1985, I think. But I think making a film about the logic of living in that time is something I was very interested in. And now there is an interesting debate in Brazil, which is very much about, the dictatorship wasn't only about the military, it was also about the business people making profits out of, and working with the military to basically pillage a lot of what the country had to offer. So I think that's one idea belonging to the film. But at the time, when I was a little kid, I mean, that time was a very, it was a strong moment, emotionally very strong moment for me, because my mother went through a difficult health problem in 77, 78. So that put a timestamp for me, much more than the military dictatorship. You know, it was there, and the logic of the country was very much the military logic. But I remember this dramatic moment in my family, and that is what I remember from that time. And of course, I did not make a film about that, but the feeling probably comes from that. Particularly because my uncle, the younger one, Ronaldo, he would take myself and my brother to the cinema all the time to take our minds away from the problem that we were having at home. So going to the cinema became a very strong memory from that time.
And though the film is set in the past, it seems incredibly timely and relevant today. I mean, what you were just saying about businesses coming together and pillaging with the aid of governments. As you screen the film at various festivals in the world, I'm thinking particularly of in the US, what has the reaction been to the film in terms of the resonance with contemporary governmental oppression?
Well, there's some strong reactions. In Spain, there were some strong reactions in San Sebastian, because I believe Spain has something with memory, considering the Franco regime. I think in the United States there have been very strong reactions, particularly about the university. For those who haven't seen the film, there is something connected to university research, academic research. And of course in Brazil, but Brazil, it's interesting because right now in Brazil, 2025, we're in a good place. I think we're in a good moment. Of course, the former president, Bolsonaro, is off to jail now, which is a very good thing. Yes. Yeah, let's applaud. After all the things that he did to our country, including plotting a coup d'etat, with the desire, the possibility of assassinating the president, the vice president, and the Supreme Court justice. And his other friends are also off to jail. So it's an interesting moment, and I'm traveling a lot with the film. And I keep getting congratulations, as if I was, and I said, well, I'm proud right now of Brazil, but I'm just with you. You know, I should just congratulate Brazil itself, whatever that means. So, interestingly, I think the film it was written during the Bolsonaro years. And I was writing up 1977, but at some point I began to realize that Bolsonaro brought a lot of the logic from 50 years ago to his government. It really felt like him and his people were trying to bring back the good old days of the military regime, almost like a Halloween party, you know. And that's when I realized that it wasn't really about 50 years ago. The film was very contemporary. You know.
I want to ask about your work with two actors in particular over the course of the last two fiction films. Wagner Moura in The Secret Agent, who's incredible, and the late, great Udo Kier, who was in The Secret Agent, and more prominently and more menacingly in Bacurau. Could you tell us about your working method with each of them and how you came to bring them into your films in the first place?
I think we should really give a round of applause to Udo Kier. The way you mentioned Wagner and Udo in the same, almost same, not sentence, but almost like in the same paragraph, it's really touching for me because I love them both. Udo is someone I was very lucky to work with twice. And anyone who has ever met Udo or has spent some time talking to him, he was a truly amazing character. And of course, if you're a cinephile, you look at him and you think of so many amazing images of cinema, you know, from Dario Argento to Fassbinder and Lars von Trier and even Michael Bay. Madonna, of course, Deeper and Deeper, a great video. But he was amazing. He was funny and he had great taste. And then he died last Sunday. We were together 1 month ago in Santa Monica at the Aero. That's when he saw The Secret Agent for the first time. He saw it next to me. I was going to leave for the screening. He said, where the fuck are you going? You're sitting next to me. And I saw the film with him. It's a great memory. And he had some great ideas. When you're making a film, you have written the script, and actors can, of course, give ideas. Some of them are good, some are bad. But Udo's ideas were always spot on. And there is a wonderful idea for The Secret Agent in his scene, which is a scene that I really love. So what an honor to have worked with him and to have spent so many hours with him talking, like the way we did. And Wagner is, I actually wrote the script for Wagner. In fact, I wrote Udo's character for Udo, and I wrote the whole film for Wagner. I've always wanted to work with him. I could tell from a very long time that he had something special, not only the actor, but the person. We met in Cannes 20 years ago. I was a critic and he had a film there. That's the first time that we met. A film called Lower City. It was in Un Certain Regard. And over the years, we came closer, and I think the Bolsonaro regime also put us in, got us closer, because we would call each other and say, "What the fuck? what is going on?" And of course, we are outspoken. And of course, the far right always found ways of attacking us, media, social media. And so we got the same kind of treatment, and we would become, we would discuss the whole situation. And that really, it's interesting how a film comes from so many feelings and so many places, One way of putting it would be it comes from pictures of ghosts, but it also comes from the desire to work with Wagner. And then it also comes from the political climate happening in Brazil. And all of this together is what explains a film like The Secret Agent.
I want to ask a question about how you think about audience. And how would you advise a young Moroccan filmmaker, for instance? When you make your films, do you think, I make my films for a Brazilian audience, they will get this stuff about Brazil's political history and that context? Or do you think, well, I also need the people in Sydney to understand the film, or the people in Paris to understand the film? How do you think about audience? Brazil has such a rich and troubled history. When conceiving of the films, do you make some concessions for the future international audience, or do you make the films very much with the Brazilian audience in mind?
That's a very interesting question, and particularly considering students here in Marrakech, here in the audience. I have really made films. I could never say that I only make films for myself, because it's a lie. I have never made a film only for myself. I think I myself have to be very happy and pleased with the film I made. But I hope the film will be seen in many places. And I don't think I try to make it easy in terms of, this scene, I hope that guy in Sydney will understand. I really think that when you make a film about yourself or about the place where you come from, that's what you bring to the table. Because that's how I learned to watch films. I grew up, like so many of us, we grew up watching Hollywood films, for example. And I remember the time when I didn't understand why in American films someone would have a beer inside a paper bag. And what the fuck? What's with the paper bag? Later I understood that there is some law that doesn't allow you to walk around on the street with a bottle of beer, which in my mind is perfectly all right, isn't it? Maybe a bottle of vodka puts you in a kind of, oh, what a drunk. But a bottle of beer is fine. I mean, they even look good. So that's one thing, and sometimes I think as a filmmaker, and it could be, a filmmaker from Morocco or from Brazil or from, I don't know, maybe even from Australia, sometimes we have to fight the sheer amount of information that we get from some countries, like, for example, the US. And it's all taken for granted. But when it comes from us, it's like, oh, but we need more context, So the Secret Agent, my films have been very well received, and they have become quite prestigious. That is a fact. But for example, The Secret Agent, sometimes you might read someone from the US or Canada or France saying, I didn't quite understand. Maybe I needed more context for. And I remember Apocalypse Now, which is a great film. It never tells you, this is Southeast Asia, 1969. The Americans are fighting the Viet Cong. So it's like, imagine somebody watching the Apocalypse Now and saying, what's with the fire in the palm trees? What's with the, why are they airlifting a cow? You know, what's with the helicopters? It is what it is, and you should just watch the film and you know, open yourself up, you know, because that's the film that we are showing. And I think texture and atmosphere and human interaction should be strong enough for you to take something away from the film that you're watching. So I think the biggest challenge for all of us, always, and I can say this to a young Moroccan filmmaker or student, is just make a film as real as you can about yourself and about where you live. And if it's a good story, and if it has a good set of ideas, people will actually want to know more. Maybe they will want to come to Morocco, and because cinema has a strength. Cinema can be a strong. I mean, that's what cinema can be, very strong in terms of presenting you a reality. You know, I, for example, in Australian cinema is part of my cinephilia from you know, when I was a teenager, and in my mind they have never gone out of fashion for me. They are still very strong films. You know, the films of Peter Weir and George Miller. And I got to meet Peter Weir in your festival, which was one of the highlights of the year for me. You know, Wake in Fright, and I love those films. I love the point of view, the roughness of Australian cinema. And for many years I wanted to visit Australia because of Australian cinema, which I finally did in 2012 with Neighboring Sounds. So I think cinema can generate curiosity. And a wonderful film from Morocco will be a wonderful film with truth about Morocco. You know, could be personal truth, or it could be cultural truth. You know, about the truth of living here, and that's what's beautiful. You know.
Thank you. That's wonderful. We're going to take your questions. We have some time for questions, so wait for a microphone, please. We have lots of questions. Great. In the center here.
Rodrigo. Kleber, tudo bem? Let me ask you a question. Wherever you go with your movies, you always talk about a film. 20 years later, Cabra Marcado para Morrer. A movie from Eduardo Coutinho, that may be the greatest documentary filmmaker in Brazil. What's the importance of talking about Coutinho wherever you go? And when you did your first feature, a documentary, Crítico, Coutinho is a character. How was the experience of being with that genius, and what was his important to you? Obrigado por você existir, nota 10.
Thank you very much. I mean, we all have favorite films in our lives, right? So when I look at Brazilian cinema, my favorite film in Brazilian cinema is Cabra Marcado para Morrer, which in the United States it's known as 20 years later. In England it's known as Man Marked for Death, which is the literal translation by Eduardo Coutinho. And this film is I think it's the strongest Brazilian film ever made. It says a lot about the logic of the logic of politics in Brazil and the logic of political violence also in Brazil. And it's a film that began as a fiction narrative in 1964. The shooting was interrupted by the military coup, which took place in 1964. And Coutinho went back 20 years later to shoot the characters that he was trying to use, all non-professional actors back in the 60s. And the film is very much about the effect of violence on one family. And it's a very strong film. And every time I get a request for a carte blanche and put together a program of Brazilian cinema, I will always have that film. I've shown that film in so many different programs, and now the next one is going to be in New York at the Film at Lincoln Center in January, because there's a program around the secret agent, which is we are putting together, and sure enough, Cabra Marcado is once again part of the program. Because I really think that every time that film screens, there could be 80 people in the audience, there could be 7 people in the audience, someone or a number of people will walk out with a different idea of cinema and a different understanding of Brazil also. So that film is very much in my mind in Neighboring Sounds, and very much in my mind in Secret Agent, and very much in my mind in Bacurau also. So it just keeps coming back. It's like a wonderful ghost, which is always near, like an angel, you know. And yeah, I did an interview with Coutinho in my documentary Critico, and he was wonderful. And I remember he probably smoked 17 cigarettes during the interview.
Hi. First of all, thank you. I'm so grateful to be here today, to get the chance to talk to you. I'm a huge fan. I'm so grateful to the festival to make this happen. I discovered your movies through my couch surfer I hosted. He had the flash disc with short movies, and I discovered to receive Filho. And since that moment, I fell in love with your cinema, because it struck me how you film the cities. They breathe, they sound, they have a voice, and they are so fucking, similar to the places I live here in Morocco. So when you walk through Neighboring Sounds, I feel like in Casablanca. So true for Pictures of Ghosts, but and even the political stand, which mirrors ours here in Morocco. And it's at that time I was really not aware that we shared a lot with Brazil. So I went to Brazil to discover the country. My best friend now is Brazilian, and I love cinema, Brazilian cinema. But what strikes me the most is the sound. It's haunting. I mean, like, I can hear your movies in my playlist. Not only because I would like to know. I know that you talked about the sound in the conversation, but I feel like most of it is put in the writing. How you work your sounds in your movies with your team to get this quality of, because your movies, not only we see the spaces, but we hear them. I have this beautiful image from Pictures of Ghosts, when you have these cathedrals and you have this sound of projector. I don't know how to say that in English. Yeah. And it was like, it filled my heart. That's it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's really great to know that the films find a connection here with you. I really think that this is something that I thought during Neighboring Sounds, and I keep going back to the same idea. I think when you make a film, you make possibly 2 films. One is the film that you see, sound and picture, and the other film is only sound. So ideally, if, it won't happen, but if one of my films was shown on the radio, like you're driving, you're an Uber, or you're at home cleaning, and you find a radio station and they're playing neighboring sounds or the secret agent. It should sound interesting. It should be an independent narrative, and you shouldn't really need the image. Maybe I'm being a little too poetic here, but it is an idea that I enjoy thinking about. You know, the film should be interesting enough to make you curious, to make you dream maybe, to make you imagine what is happening in the film. And that is one way of thinking about sound. And as I said before, it's not about giving a hyper treatment to sound. It shouldn't really be able to hear everything. Even with sound people, the big joke is, in any film, especially commercial films, there's a scene at a park or on the street, a bicycle goes by, and you will always get the ding-ding, which it's like a cliche of sound. A bird flies by and you hear the flapping of which you don't in real life. I don't, I'm not sure if you do. And it's really about picking the right sounds. So just, maybe sometimes you're in love with one sound or maybe a couple of sounds and just concentrate on those. But of course, it requires more work, but that's what working with sound is about. And thank you for your question.
Hi, hello. Nice to meet you. I'm a cinema student. I have two questions for you. Okay, so first question is, what was your childhood dreams? Because I'm really interested by that. And the second one what is the lesson of life or the sentence that you heard in your life who transform the way you look at the world, look at your life, and that you can see through your principles?
So childhood dreams in terms of psychology or a desire that I had in childhood?
Whatever you want. Not really like you want to be, but what you want to do when you grow up, when you're going to be an adult. I mean, my dream when I was a child was to travel a lot and to meet a lot of people. What were yours?
Well, yeah, that's. I've been traveling a lot now, you know, with the secret agent and going to many different countries, and people ask me, "Are you tired?" And I said, "Well, I am tired, a little bit tired, but I'm happy because I always wanted to make films and travel and show my films. So it's almost like this is what I asked Santa Claus many years ago, you know. So I'm happy to do what I'm doing, and maybe that was my childhood dream. And as I said, I never had a plan B. At some point, I thought I might do architecture, but I discovered that math was an important part of the syllabus, and I thought that's not going to work. I was a case study in 2 schools about someone who was very good in writing and very bad in maths. I'm not sure I have a sentence that is the driving force in my life, but sometimes I remember I think it's credited to Dostoevsky, write about your village, and it should be all right, it should be universal. But it's not something that I have, you know, on my bedroom. But it's something that I often think about, you know. Thank you.
Hi, can we discuss the film critic to director pipeline? Because I did the opposite. I went to a film school and then I studied journalism. and I mainly have been writing about movies for the past years.
You really have what? Writing?
Writing about movies, like film reviews and critics and such, which made me very critical of my own film. So now I can't get out of my head and switch from the critic to movie maker pipeline again. The second question is, I asked this to Fernanda Torres recently. Are you aware of the impact of Brazilian cult films on a Moroccan audience? Thank you.
On a Moroccan audience? I just had a beautiful question from her now, and this is my third time at the Marrakech International Film Festival, and I feel so welcomed and liked or loved here, so that's why I keep coming back, I suppose. I think that writing is a great exercise about understanding what you do as a filmmaker, but it shouldn't be too. I don't think you should compartmentalize so much, because I am the same person when I go to the cinema with my kids, with Emily, just to see a film, and we come out and they say, "What did you think?" And says, "I don't know, I'll think about it," you know. And as a film critic, it's almost like I had to have an answer, and that began to make me a little uncomfortable. I don't necessarily have an answer right now. I would have to sit down and write. But as a film critic, you're supposed to have an answer. And so many people come to you right after the screening. "Did you like it?" "I don't know, maybe. I have to think about it, you know." And when you make a film, you just try to make the best film you can, and you have to follow your instincts. Because if you follow some kind of scientific rule, I don't think it's going to be a good... I think making a film is very much like having a good conversation, you know. You shouldn't... You go out with a friend, you don't plan the conversation, you just talk, and the conversation can go to many places. It can be funny, it can be dark, it can be unpleasant maybe, but that's just the nature of the flow. And when I sit down to write a script, I don't really know what is going to happen. And you shouldn't really tell the script what it should be, because otherwise it won't be natural. And sometimes writers and filmmakers, they want the characters to say something, and then that's not what the character would say. And then the actor comes and says, "I don't think she would say this." And that's an interesting lesson, you know, and I've been there.
Question then.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Very good to meet you. Congratulations on your work. Let's have a good, serious conversation on the Amazons.
I'm sorry?
The Amazons, the forest
Yeah.
in your country, a very unique feature of nature in your country. We just have the COP30 meeting there in Belém, but there is also news about exploding hydrocarbons. So will you film the Amazon forest, and what will you say about it before it disappears?
If I would film the forest?
Will you have something cinematographic to say about the Amazon forest before it disappears? And what will you say?
That's a very good and strong question. There are so many themes which are essential to life and to all of us. But the fact that a filmmaker doesn't focus on that theme, it doesn't mean that it's not relevant and strong as a theme. I have to say that the themes that I have developed, I feel very close to them, emotionally and also, let's say, intellectually. And the Amazon is a very strong theme, and it belongs to Brazil and it belongs to the world. But I don't think I myself would have something relevant to say out of my own experience. I live very far from the Amazon. The Amazon is a strong idea and is a strong environment, but I live away from it. And it's such a complex universe, not only imagetically, but also politically and culturally, with all the nations that exist inside the Amazon and all the life. And there's so many layers of life that I wouldn't know how to handle that theme. It's almost like, I mean, we could make a list of 10 amazing themes, you know, from the Second World War to research. These are all great themes, but we all have few opportunities to make films, and I really feel that I should really stick to something that I have a deep understanding. And so far, my films have been very close to me as a person. Yeah, I think that's the best answer I can give. But the Amazon is incredibly complex and rich as a theme, and I think maybe Herzog's Fitzcarraldo is a very strong film which takes place in the Amazon. But I feel that most films don't quite get there to express, you know, the seriousness and the richness of what it is.
Okay, we have the last question, the very last question.
Hello, sir. First of all, I'm really happy to be here present. I'm so lucky. So my question is that with your unique skill in movies, it's really made me feel in love in your short movies. Do you think, is there any chance you can apply this unique skill with Moroccan culture, which is pretty unique? I think it will make a really good film, blinding. And thank you.
So, to use the skills of making a film in Morocco? Well, my biggest concern about making a film outside my environment is feeling like an outsider making comments about a place that I don't quite know personally. For example, we Brazilians can be very critical of a foreign filmmaker coming to Brazil and making a film that looks like he's a fucking tourist. We are very critical. Like, oh, look at this guy. Look at this fucking film. He thinks Rio, look at the way he looks at Rio, you know? So that is a nightmare for me. And coming to Morocco, which is such a complex country, like all countries are, it's a complex society full of codes. I do not know the language. For example, I know English, I speak English, and I could in theory be closer to England, where I lived, than I am to Denmark, for example. I've only been to Denmark once. I'm not sure I would feel comfortable making a film in Denmark. Maybe it would depend on the film, but not about life in Denmark. And coming to Morocco to do a film, I would have to be very sure of what I was doing, because I would not want to show a lack of understanding. And by showing a lack of understanding, that rhymes with a lack of respect. And that I find a complex and kind of a delicate situation. So as much as I'm fascinated when I come here, I'm not sure I have the understanding, you know. You understand what I'm trying to say? It's very, I'm being very open about this. But it's not only Morocco, it would be applied to so many other countries, you know. My wife is French, and I have a strong connection to France. And still in France, it would have to be the right project for me to do a French film. But I would still feel a little afraid to sound like, look at this guy coming from Brazil and making a film about us, you know. Maybe I want to do a film in France, but I have to cross that line, you know.
Kleber Mendonc, Filho, Emily Lesclos, thank you both so much for being here at the Marrakech Film Festival, for giving so graciously of your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for coming.